We're going to cover another TLR camera today, and I want to add this on to the beginning of the video because a couple of you have indicated that you would really like to see pictures that I've made with these cameras, and I have no problem with that at all, but I thought what would be a really cool idea to do is I'm actually going to do a TLR shootout. And so if you can give me about 2 weeks to get that together, what I want to do is take a bunch of these TLR cameras that I've been talking about on here. I want to load them up with the same film type and take the same shots with them in different situations, and then we can look at them and see how they compare in terms of sharpness, contrast, and the like. So stay tuned for that. Hey everybody, my name is Ted Forbes and welcome back to another episode of The Art of Photography. And today I want to do one more episode on our TLR cameras. We've covered a lot of these recently, and this is one more that I own. Twin lens reflex cameras were very popular in the 40s and 50s. They featured two lenses. There was a viewing lens and a taking lens. And we've covered a lot of these in the last couple shows. We talked about the Rolleiflex, we've talked about the Czechoslovakian Flexoret, we've talked about the Ansco automatic reflex, and I want to mention the Ciroflex. Now this camera is not in the class of any of those other cameras I mentioned. It's a entry level to maybe intermediate level camera. So these were a lot less expensive. They don't have really any bells and whistles on them. They're a much cheaper camera. Are capable of taking decent pictures, and we'll break it down and I'll do it up close in a minute and talk about this. But the Ciroflex company, these were a USA made camera. And another point I want to make on here, because a couple people had left comments and I actually got in an email discussion with somebody, but I said in the last video that I covered the Ansco automatic reflex that it was the United States failed attempt into camera design. And what I was implying, or what I really meant by that, I don't remember my exact quote, but it was the failed attempt at the top level, pro level camera design. What they were trying to design was something that was very expensive, that was a high level, high end pro TLR. And that's where they failed. And the US had never really been able to fulfill that. Now, this is a USA made camera, but it is not anywhere near in the league that what they were going with Ansco with the automatic reflex. So I just want to make that point before we moved on. But the Ciroflex was built in the USA by the company Ciro, and the earliest cameras, the Model A's, were built in Detroit. And you can tell if it's a Detroit model or not because I don't know if you can see the logo on here or not, but the Ciroflex had a lowercase c instead of a capital C. So that's the big difference. Those were the Detroit models. They later moved the company to Delaware, Ohio, and that's where most of these were made. Now there were basically 6 models of this camera that you could find, all with little minor differences, and they were lettered numbers. So sorry, they were lettered model names. So it was Model A, Model B, C. This is a Model D, and there's a Model E, and then finally there's a Model F. And really, for all intents and purposes, they had slightly different usually shutter lens configurations. All of these are at 85 millimeter, except the F, which I'll talk about in a second. And again, like the Ansco automatic reflex, the reason these are 85 millimeter over the standard 80 was they could use a cheaper lens and get better coverage over the film, over the frame, and get better edge-to-edge sharpness if they went for a longer focal length just slightly. So why these are 85 and then the F is an 83. And so that's basically, there's minor differences between the models. They're more or less variations of the same thing. Now the Model F was more expensive, and it actually featured a better lens design. It had an actual 4-element lens on it, and it had a different shutter. Most of these are what are known as what they called the Alphax shutters. This is an Alphax shutter, and the Model F had a Rapax shutter. Now, I want to give you a quick disclaimer. I believe I filmed the up-close part of this before I did this part, and I think I called it the Aflax, which it is not the insurance company, it is the Alphax shutter. So, for whatever you want to do with that. But anyway, that is basically what the Ciroflex is. Later on, the company ended up selling their entire camera line to the Graflex company, and Graflex re-released these as the Graflex 22. There were some minor changes. They came in a different color. I believe they were gray, and the Graflex were very popular as well. And so anyway, let's go up and close, and I want to show you all about the twin lens Ciroflex. Okay, so we're taking a look at the Ciroflex Model D, and as I kind of mentioned before, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to show this is not a particularly high-end camera for its time, or obviously now. You know, these are all old antique cameras, and this one, you know, if you're looking for something, if you want to get a TLR, the Ciroflex isn't a bad option because you can get them ridiculously cheap. I think I paid maybe $25 for this when I bought it. They're going to be varying in quality, as you'll see as we go through here. However, if you don't need some of the high-end features of one of the other cameras, and that's why I was making the point when we did the episode on the Ansco automatic reflex, is that, you know, this was an American TLR, but it was pretty low end, or medium end, I guess you could say. And you're going to see here, it's a little bit like a Holga with a better lens and made out of metal, and some more focusing options and obviously shutter speeds and stuff. So we'll go through and I'll show you the Ciroflex Model D here, and you can kind of see what we're talking about. So pretty much classic TLR design where you have a viewing lens and a taking lens. The taking lens on here is an 85 millimeter Volensac, and it's an Graflex shutter on here. And you remember we were talking about why it would be an 85 and not an 80, and it was to increase edge-to-edge sharpness on there by just increasing the focal length, which, you know, more or less works, but it's, you know, so they could save money without having to design a fancier lens. This one, the maximum f-stop is 3.5 on here, and basically it's pretty easy how this works. You have your f-stop over on the side here, and so when I move this ring, it's going to move the leaves in the shutter. It's on the back of the shutter to adjust the aperture, and then your shutter speeds are over here. Now, due to the varying in quality, you know, if you're going to buy one of these, you may have trouble with the lower shutter speeds. This camera is horrible at lower shutter speeds. There is a time and a bulb setting, so if you want to manually expose for like a really long exposure, that's not a problem. Top shutter speeds in this one work okay. So you have basically a top speed of 200, then you have options of 150, 25, and 1/10 of a second, and then time and bulb. So it's not a whole lot of options, but, you know, enough to take decent pictures with. So that's basically what's on the front, and it's a self-cocking shutter. So basically, when I fire it, I can fire it again, and I can fire it again. You don't have to cock the shutter. It is self-contained on that. So anyway, kind of cool, you know, for all intents and purposes. Now, there's no double exposure prevention, so if you forget to wind your film, you could wind up with double exposures, which, you know, you may or may not want, who knows. On the side, basically, this is the focusing knob, which moves the lens in and out, so I can adjust my focus. And then this is the winder for the film, and I'll show you how the film works in here. When I open this back, you're gonna see that basically you have a little window down here where you're gonna use the tape on the back of the film to know what frame you're on. So once you're past frame 1, if you've already shot it, if you want to not double expose, you need to wind it to frame 2, so on and so forth. Pretty decent build in here, but what you're going to see inside, and I don't know if this is going to be really apparent on the video just because it's so dark in here, but one of the drags about the Ciroflex is it does not have a flocked interior. And so what that means is it's just the reflective aluminum that this is made out of inside, and it is painted black, but it still is reflective. So sometimes it's really easy to get light flares on here, all kinds of weird reflections that could come up on your film and do ghost exposures and things like that. So if you're shooting in really bright light, or if you're shooting at night when you have kind of stray light going out from like buildings or street lights or something, that can be a problem. And so the lack of a flocked interior, you know, it puts it kind of, for me, on the level of the Holga. So, you know, it's kind of a, you know, design flaw that they probably could have dealt with, but did not. In the top, you have the viewfinder, and you move this little crank down to release it, bring this up. Mine has seen better days. It's not terribly dark. It's usable, certainly. And then it's the standard fare inside, but no release levers for anything. So what you have here is the little magnifying assist here to help you get in focus. And then you also have the typical action sports viewfinder thing. So I pop this down. There's a little notch where it will help it stick, and then you're able to manually look through that little square notch there and frame this up. So, you know, that's kind of standard on TLRs, not the greatest thing in the world, but, you know, it does function, and it does work just fine. Also, make sure sometimes these are just not the greatest design in the world, and if they haven't been lubricated in a while, they can be real janky and kind of bent and coming apart, and you can see this one's not in wonderful condition. On this side over here, basically we got flash sinks, and I don't trust either one of these to actually work now, and I never use this camera with flash, so it's not the end of the world for me. And like I said, in the bottom you get a tripod socket. And then the other cool thing, because of the nature of this camera, and I tend to look at this as something more in the class of, you know, a toy camera with some options in the shutter speed and a better lens. And it certainly does take sharp images, even though you're going to get flaring sometimes and things like that. But what's kind of fun is to, you know, treat this camera differently and do different things with it. And I've done stuff, and I'll show you an image. I'll roll it over the top here. But I used to put slide film in here, or black and white film, and basically you can jam the cartridge in here, and I use some foam to do that. And your winder up here is just going to freely turn, you know, whatever you've got in here to spool onto. So if I move the spool up there, So I've rolled 35mm film through here before, and what it does is it shoot, because your image frame is way bigger than 35, it's going to shoot over the sprocket holes. And so I took some images doing that a few years ago, and you know, it can do things because it's not an amazing camera where you can actually make it do things that are very different and unusual, you know, unconventional, I guess. So I kind of treat this a lot in the class of the Holga. So basically that is the Ciroflex. Mine is a Model D, and there are other models in varying quality, but they're all basically the same class of SLR. So TLR. There's no hand crank, there's no double exposure prevention. You're gonna be kind of limited on shutter speeds. The lens is a little bit cheaper designed, but you know, for all intents and purposes, for a very inexpensive camera, if you just want to get into shooting on a TLR, I really think these are kind of what you want to look for. There's things like the Seagulls and you know, the Lubitels and stuff like that, but they're still going to cost more money. So that is the Ciroflex Model D. Okay, so that is the Ciroflex, and in this particular case, the Model D, which I own. And as I mentioned, these can be found very cheaply. They were made in the hundreds of thousands, and so they're widely produced and they're pretty easy to find now. If you go on eBay or something like that, you're likely to find a Ciroflex. Now, because of the nature of this model, there were a ton of them produced. They were not really expensive cameras. A lot of them were purchased by consumers that just, you know, they're not well taken care of, let's just say. It's not like they were professional photographers who use these. So you're going to get varying degrees of quality in this. A lot of times you're going to find a really filthy viewfinder in the top. Sometimes there's dings in it. Look for, obviously, fungus in the lens. You don't want that. But other than that, if you're willing to do a little bit of work and clean one of these up, you can find these for like $20 US, $25, maybe $30. I wouldn't pay a whole lot more than that for one of these unless it's just seriously in pristine condition. And the reason I covered this on the show, I mean, we're talking about a considerable price difference between this and something like a Rolleiflex. If you're just interested in inexpensively getting a TLR and fooling around and getting some pictures and doing some cool stuff with it, this is a great idea because it won't cost you much money. If it's something you're not sure if you're willing to really commit to, it's not like you're forking out, you know, a couple $1,000s for a Rolleiflex, or, you know, the one I showed you wasn't that. But anyway, you can get these for well under $100. Now, the difference is the Model F, they usually go for 100 and up because it was just the top of the line model. Is it worth it? I think if you can find it for exactly $100, that's fine. If you're going to go higher than that, I think you're getting into the territory of maybe looking at some alternatives that are much better camera. And here's where some of you are going to disagree with me, because the Graflex 22, which basically Ciroflex sold the company in, so they rebranded it as the Graflex, there's a couple minor differences on those cameras, and for what they are, they're good, but they're collector's items. And so if you're going to find one now, you're probably going to pay a lot of money for it. And that's kind of where I just don't think they're worth what you're going to pay for it. I'm not saying they're bad cameras at all. This is just in my opinion. I think if you're going to get, you know, into the 250 and up range, I think you'd be better off looking for a Rolleiflex or something like that. That's just a better camera, got better features, a nicer lens, it's just more up to date. And so that's just my 2 cents on that. Now, if you have a Graflex, don't be insulted. I mean, they're still fine cameras. But, you know, I would go look for a Ciroflex if you're interested in this, or if you just want a second TLR to goof around with. And like I said, I've done things like put 35mm in here and played with the lens on it. I mean, you know, you're not messing up anything expensive. So if you want something that's going to be kind of experimental in nature, I think, again, this is a good camera to have. And, you know, these all shoot medium format. They have sharp enough lenses, and you can get great stuff with these. Like I mentioned, there's some big differences between this and something like a Rolleiflex. So anyway, hope that helps. And coming up, I am going to I'll go ahead and announce this now, and I'm going to actually put a stinger at the beginning of this video too, because I forgot to mention it earlier. What I want to do is, several of you have made comments that we haven't showed a lot of images with these cameras, or that I haven't showed a lot of images. And what I would like to do is actually do a TLR shootout where we put the same film in different cameras, take the same images, and then compare the shots and see what the difference is really in the final photograph. So watch for that. Give me about a week or two to get that together, and we will get that into the schedule. So anyway, guys, once again, that is the Ciroflex Model D in this case. And once again, thank you again for watching The Art of Photography. I'll see you guys next time. Later.